They're not working. They have not prevented rents from rising. And in fact, they have created downward rigidity in the rental market. So I think they are making an already difficult situation.
93,000 landlords quit Britain's rental market in 2025. Not a trickle, not a trend to watch, a mass exit. And 2026 is already on track to be worse, with estimates of 110,000 more landlords gone before the year is out. Every landlord who leaves takes a home with them, not a new build, not a planning permission, a real existing home that was housing a real existing tenant who now has nowhere to go. Rents are already rising above wage growth. Bidding wars for rental properties are breaking out in London, Bristol, and Manchester. And the government, whose new law triggered this exodus, is now watching a rental crisis it built with its own legislation. This is what happens when you reform a market without understanding what holds it together. The numbers that tell the story. The private rented sector in England houses nearly 20% of all households. That is not a niche part of the housing market. That is 1 in 5 families, 1 in 5 young professionals, 1 in 5 people who either cannot afford to buy or choose not to. It is the foundation on which millions of lives are built, and it is contracting. The English Private Landlord Survey, the most comprehensive study of the sector, published findings that should have stopped government in its tracks. 31% of landlords plan to reduce the size of their portfolio within 2 years. 16% are considering selling every single property they own. In a sector of roughly 2.65 million landlords, that is not a fringe group of hesitant investors. That is hundreds of thousands of people making decisions right now that will remove hundreds of thousands of homes from the rental market. In the House of Lords, Lord Jameson quoted the Black and White Bridging Report directly. 93,000 landlords left in 2025, with 110,000 projected to leave in 2026. He asked the Housing Minister plainly, can the Minister explain how this helps those desperately looking for a home to rent? The Minister's response was that the government had published guidance and was working constructively with the sector. It was the kind of answer that says nothing while sounding like it says something. Meanwhile, between April and June 2025 alone, 6,700 households in the private rented sector qualified for help from their council to prevent homelessness after their landlord decided to sell. That is 6,700 families in a single quarter, facing homelessness not because they failed to pay rent, not because they damaged a property, but because their landlord decided to exit the market. Those families are now on council waiting lists, in temporary accommodation, or competing for whatever shrinking rental stock remains. The law that changed everything. To understand why landlords are leaving at this pace, you need to understand what the government actually did. The Renters' Rights Act came into force on 1st May 2026. It is, without question, the biggest overhaul of private renting in England in over 40 years. And some of what it does is genuinely positive for tenants. Long overdue, in fact. No-fault evictions are abolished. A landlord can no longer serve a Section 21 notice and remove a tenant simply because they want to. From May 2026, every eviction requires a legal ground, rent arrears, antisocial behavior, genuine intention to sell or move in. Tenants now have security they have never had before. That is real protection for millions of people who have spent years living with the anxiety that they could be removed with 2 months' notice for no reason. Fixed-term tenancies are gone. All private tenancies convert automatically to rolling periodic agreements. A tenant can leave with 2 months' notice. A landlord can only end the tenancy with a valid ground through the courts. Rental bidding wars are banned. Landlords must advertise a single price and cannot solicit or accept offers above it. Tenants gain the right to keep pets unless a landlord has genuine grounds to refuse. On paper, this is a tenant-friendly revolution, and the government presented it as exactly that. But here is what the government chose not to calculate loudly enough. A landlord who cannot regain possession of their property except through a court process, which currently takes an average of 7 to 8 months even in straightforward cases, is a landlord who now carries a fundamentally different level of risk. A landlord with a non-paying tenant faces waiting 3 full months of arrears before they can even begin proceedings, then months of court process, during which they receive nothing and cannot relet. For a small landlord with 1 or 2 properties, a teacher who bought a flat to supplement their pension, a couple who kept a property when they moved for work, that financial exposure is not theoretical, it is existential. Jason Harris Cohen, managing director at Landlord Buyer, was direct. For small, private landlords in particular, property now feels less like a long-term investment and more like a heavily regulated business with rapidly diminishing returns. The perfect storm that built up before the Act even arrived. The Renters' Rights Act was not the first blow. It was the final one in a sequence that had been building for years. In 2015, the government removed mortgage interest relief for buy-to-let landlords. Before that change, landlords could deduct their full mortgage interest payment from their rental income before calculating tax. After it, they were taxed on the full rental income and given only a basic rate credit. For higher rate taxpayers, many small landlords, this effectively doubled the tax on rental profits overnight. A property generating £10,000 in rental income with £8,000 in mortgage interest costs used to produce a £2,000 taxable profit. After the change, it produced a £10,000 taxable income with a partial credit. The numbers stopped working for thousands of landlords at that moment. Then interest rates rose. A landlord who bought a rental property in 2019 at a 2% mortgage rate is now looking at renewal rates of 5 or 6%. The monthly payment on a £200,000 buy-to-let mortgage went from under £700 to over £1,100. On many properties, that single change turned positive monthly cash flow into a monthly loss. Then came the energy efficiency requirements. From 2028, all new rental tenancies must meet an EPC rating of C or above. Upgrading a property from D to C, new insulation, new windows, sometimes a heat pump, costs between £5,000 and £15,000 per property. For a landlord with 3 or 4 properties, that is a £40,000 to £60,000 compliance bill on the horizon, with no guaranteed route to recovering it through rent increases. The 2024 autumn budget added more. Rental income will be taxed under new property income tax brackets from April 2027, with rates 2% higher across all bands. The mansion tax on properties over £2 million added further pressure at the top end. Each of these changes was presented as reasonable in isolation. Together, they changed the entire economic case for being a landlord. With the average rental yield in the UK sitting at 5.8%, it is not surprising that many are pulling their money out to invest in much more stable avenues. What happens to the tenant when the landlord leaves? Here is the part the government's messaging consistently underplays. When a landlord sells, the tenant does not automatically gain a new landlord. In most cases, they lose their home. A sold rental property either goes to a homeowner-occupier who wants to live there and therefore needs the tenant out, or to another investor who may or may not want to take on the existing tenancy. In a market where investor appetite has collapsed, the most likely buyer is an owner-occupier, which means the tenant is served notice and the home leaves the rental sector permanently. In London, the prime central London lettings market contracted by 6% during 2025, with the total value of long-let rental transactions falling by over £23 million in a single year. The supply of long-term rental properties is shrinking in the city where demand is most acute. The result is inevitable and already visible. Rental bidding wars, properties receiving 10 or 15 applications within hours of listing. Tenants offering above the advertised rent, despite the fact that accepting such offers is now illegal because the alternative is having nowhere to go. Sarah, a 34-year-old nurse in Manchester, had rented the same 2-bedroom flat for 6 years. In October 2025, her landlord served her notice, not because she had done anything wrong, because he was selling before the new act made eviction harder. She had 3 months to find a new property in a city where available rentals had dropped 18% in 2 years. She applied for 14 properties. She was rejected from 7 because other applicants offered more. She eventually found a flat at £350 more per month than she had been paying. Her take-home pay has not increased. Something else went. A story is being repeated in thousands of households every month, and it will accelerate in 2026. The government's impossible position. Keir Starmer's government designed the Renters' Rights Act with genuine intent to protect tenants. That intent is real. The inequalities in the private rental sector, insecure tenancies, retaliatory evictions, landlords ignoring repair obligations are real. The case for reform was legitimate, but good intentions do not override market dynamics. And the market dynamic here is straightforward. You cannot increase the regulatory burden on a sector, raise its tax costs, reduce its financial returns, and restrict its legal tools, all simultaneously, without some participants choosing to exit. That is not a failure of landlord loyalty. It is a rational response to changed economics. The government's position is that the reforms will professionalize the sector, pushing out accidental landlords and leaving larger, better managed operators. That argument has some merit at the theoretical level, but it ignores the timeline. Professionalization takes years. The supply gap created by 93,000 landlords leaving in 2025 and 110,000 more expected in 2026 is immediate. The tenants who need homes right now cannot wait for the market to restructure. In the Lords debate, Baroness Taylor of Stevenage said, "The government was working with landlords to ensure they were ready for the changes." Right Move called for incentives to keep landlords in the sector. The National Residential Landlords Association warned that without supply-side support, the reforms would harm the very tenants they were designed to protect. None of this has produced a policy response that addresses the supply problem at the speed and scale it demands. And while the debate continues in committee rooms and policy briefings, the rental listings keep falling. The rents keep rising, and the tenants who need homes keep bidding in a market with fewer and fewer homes to bid on. The renter who cannot win either way. There is a painful irony at the heart of this story. The Renters' Rights Act was passed to protect tenants, and it will for the tenants who have stable landlords and stay in their homes. The security of tenure provisions are genuinely valuable. But for tenants who need to find a home in 2026, who are entering the market for the first time, or who have been displaced by a selling landlord, the Act has made things worse. Not because tenant rights were the wrong idea, but because the supply consequences were not managed alongside the rights reforms. A smaller rental market with stronger rights is better for the tenants already inside it. It is significantly worse for everyone trying to get in. And with 93,000 homes leaving the sector in 2025 and 110,000 more set to follow, the queue to get in is getting longer, the wait is getting harder, and the price of entry is rising faster than wages can follow. 93,000 landlords gone in 2025, 110,000 more projected to leave in 2026, rents rising above wages, bidding wars in cities across Britain, and 6,700 families in a single quarter made homeless because their landlord decided to sell. The government reformed the market it needed to protect and created the conditions for a supply crisis that will hurt the very people the reforms were meant to help. Hit subscribe because more landlords are making that decision right now. More tenants will receive those letters, and the rental crisis building in Britain's cities is nowhere near its worst point yet.